Welcome to And It's Live, the podcast which dives deep into football's most iconic seasons, stories, and what ifs. If you love football, history, tactics, and nostalgia, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and drop us a like on YouTube so you don't miss an episode. Hello and welcome back to the main event, the Champions League History Show here on Heart and Hand. We have reached season 2000-2001, a new entry for England that catches the eye, and two teams on a mission for revenge. One in particular will be successful at the end of it. To run through the next 3 weeks is Adam Thornton. How are we, Adam?
Hello, I am very good, thank you.
David Edgar's here as well.
Oh, you don't care how I am. That's fine. I remember.
We've spoken before. Adam just joined us. I know very well that you're in fine fettle. 2000-2001. Again, listeners, if you want a detailed breakdown and catharsis of the Rangers' contribution to this season's Champions League, you can find that in the archives of this network very easily. We will touch on it, but we're here to try and take in the whole shooting match, I suppose. And we'll start with the first group stage then, Adam, as we tend to do. And we start with Group B because Arsenal are back at Highbury. The Wembley thing for 2 years hasn't worked. It may have worked financially, but it did not work for the team. They're back at Highbury. And, Lazio are clearly the tricky team. Shakhtar Donetsk and Sparta Prague are the others. They go and win in Prague, I think, in that first match day. They're in big bother, though, this first game at Highbury, at home to Donetsk. You would think this is an absolute routine win. They're 2-0 down just before half-time. They get a penalty that Henry misses and Viltord rushes in. And then it's Martin Keown with 2 goals in the last 5 minutes in injury time that give Arsenal a 3-2 lead. And they're kind of on their way. They beat Lazio at home as well. Top the group, just. But this is, I guess, a wee bit more like it. Not a great season in the league, Adam, but something's building here. The Dreamcast strip, and they'll be league champions the following year. But Freddie Ljungberg's there. Is this just again the final year of building for Arsenal and just things kind of just starting to come together?
Yeah, I think so. There's a wee bit of a changeover in this year. You've got some of the Invincibles coming in, Loren, Robert Pires, guys like that coming in. You see a few leaving that maybe hadn't been. A couple of the old guard. Winterburn goes. Davor Suker had been there for a bit and didn't do very well. Overmars went to Barcelona. Petit went to Barcelona as well, obviously this summer before. So yeah, it was good. I must admit, looking at the highlights, it was good to see them back at Highbury, like you said, that big screen when you never had that. Seeing, like, obviously the screens are 10 a penny now, but when you never really had that so often, it was always quite good. Even though it only showed the lineup, it didn't show highlights or anything like that. It was always one of those striking features of Highbury. So you're right, yeah. After a year away, it's very good to have them back. I'm always just disappointed with Arsenal in these, to be honest. It's always a little bit. You're right, they do get through. They're probably not really in any danger, but yeah, it's one of those sort of classic cases of all of the good moments I remember about Arsenal from this time are all pretty much in the league, as far as I'm concerned. There's nothing really striking. I don't think, obviously, when they get to the final in a few years' time, it's more of a surprise or a huge surprise than anything else. So yeah, very much on top, no issues, I think, here, despite some of the results and some of the goals that you mentioned. But yeah, lots still to do, I think, on the European stage for them.
Martin, you mentioned there that Petit had gone, and the balance in this Arsenal team isn't right. They're conceding goals at a rate that they didn't previously this season. If you look, there's a 4-2, there's a 3-2. When they need to concentrate, when they were fantastic at home against Lazio. And by the way, credit to the Arsenal, but I can't see any football club these days saying, right, well, it'd be better for us on a football sense, even though we're going to lose 50,000 tickets 3 times. That would never happen in 2024. So fair play to them. But, you know, they beat Lazio at home in a thrilling match. They're excellent. This star-packed Lazio team. They then go over there because it's the middle 2 games. Takes a Pires goal in the last minute, but a point.
And it's a
brilliant
beauty as well.
Oh, what a player he was. But the balance just isn't quite right. And the other, just as a wee interesting curio, a player by the name of Tomasz Rosicky, who would be well known to Arsenal, starring for Sparta Prague in this tournament. I love things like that the first time we played there. But yeah, they just didn't. And we saw this domestically as well, that they were conceding at a rate that they just hadn't before, and teams were getting results. And it's still the kind of famous back four. I mean, they're still, you mentioned that they're Dixon, Adams, 𝐾𝐽, Winterburn, they're all still there. Although you're getting guys like 𝐬𝐿𝐫𝐞𝐿 coming in and playing quite a bit. He gets a goal in one of the early games to win it, in fact. But yeah, just not this perfect machine, just not quite. But going forward, they still had phenomenal talent. I mean, it's actually scary when you think of the class of player Arsenal had. You know, Viltord, Henry, Pires, Ljungberg, who at the time was sensational. So many quality players. Carew is there as well.
Yeah, so many cameos from Carew, isn't there? He pops up all the time. But you know what I mean, Adam? It's kind of there, like, but it's not complete. I mean, the FA Cup final, I think, from memory, against Liverpool and Cardiff, where they're 1-up, they're in total control of the game. Liverpool have been a bit of a disappointment, and Owen scores 2 goals in the last few minutes to kind of snatch the cup. There's something kind of missing, but you see the link between Bergkamp and Ljungberg and Henry and Pires. But they signed Campbell the following summer, huge for many reasons. Gio goes there as well. There's a few others that just kind of make sense, and all of a sudden things just click into place. But I guess from an attacking sense, I saw things in this Champions League that would be forerunner of things to come from them, because they're going to go into a great period over the next few years.
Yeah, and I think there's no getting away from it. The impact of Henry is huge for them. Particularly, like I said, when we got used to Overmars, Ian Wright and 𝐿𝐾𝐿 a few years before that, having someone come in who can deal with that so seamlessly, I think really, really helps. And like you mentioned, a little bit of quality in the back line when it's not necessarily starting to creak, but let's be honest, they're very far past the wrong side of 30. All of them pretty much, having been able to bring in people like Sol Campbell, Kolo Toure coming in, I guess a year or so later on, really, really helps. I think, like you said, they've then got the foundation there, they've got the framework, and they can go. But as David said, this year wasn't without its challenges. I know they came back in that Donetsk game and they relied on that late equalising press. I never really felt like they were in much doubt, but as David said, they were still conceding quite a lot of goals.
An old friend, Real Madrid, who are obviously holders, they, again, just business as usual, really, in Group A, 13 points. The only defeat coming right at the very end to a Spartak Moscow side who go up with them in second place. And Bayer Leverkusen, David, they're there. They take the UEFA Cup space, but obviously watch out for them when we go to our next season. One of the reasons I really love doing this show is you start to see the seeds of things that are going to come to fruition a wee bit further down the line.
Yeah, totally. I ended up going down a bit of a rabbit hole with the 2 Bayer Leverkusen Real Madrid games here. I'm watching with Spanish commentary, which was great. I'd forgotten how wonderful both these matches were. The first one's 3-2. It's in Germany, and it's 3-2 to Real Madrid. Bobby Carlos popping up with a double. But there's a young German called Michael Ballack who scores in that game, and he also scores for them the winner against Spartak later on in the group stage. And I think that this is the year that everybody was, he's something really special. He'd been coming through, but he matured. But yeah, the first game is 3-2 to Real Madrid in Germany, and then it's 5-3, which was just, I know you hate that's a hockey score to you, but it was such a fantastic game. Some of the players, I think to people our age, it's almost like porn, but Guti, who I think Adam mentioned on the last show, he's never really the first one that gets mentioned in any era of Real Madrid players, but he was fabulous. I mean, how many assists and goals did he pop up and play a part in then? But yeah, as you say, it was all business. I think 𝐬𝐻𝐾 were right to be a wee bit disappointed not to take the spot, with no disrespect at all meant to Spartak. But I still think Bayer had the players. However, they did the right thing. They took it as a learning experience, and in the next couple of years, they will grow and develop.
Do you know, I felt a bit sorry for Guti, I have to say, because he sort of got lost a little bit in, I guess, to begin with, not being Raul, which is not really a disservice. But then also, I think we said before, David, that whole 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞𝐿 and Pavons type thing. He kind of got lost in that a little bit on, I would say, on the Pavon side, which I think is a bit harsh. I think looking back, he obviously Galacticos were players that got signed. I think really was the thing there, rather than maybe good players that were already there. So I think he got a little bit lost in the shuffle, which is a shame because he was a brilliant player.
I challenge any listener to go and watch Real Madrid highlights from this era and him not do something even in those brief highlight packages. But, they didn't get rid of him. He was always there because he was always a contributor. But if ever a club made it clear, as Adam said, that the signings were the new toys and the ones who were the stars and everyone else had to carry the water, it's Real Madrid. But he was a fantastic player, and like I say, a little bit like in the modern era, I think, for Real Madrid, a comparative would be maybe somebody like Dani Carvajal. I don't mean type of player, obviously, completely different position, but just he's always there. And then at the end of the career, you look at the medals and you go, oh, and you've maybe been distracted by the glamour names, and Real Madrid want you to be, but they always have very effective guys who are quite happy to be best supporting actor, and Guti was one of these. But yeah, Bayer serving notice, and of course the next year we all know what will happen.
Yeah,
it's funny that, isn't it? Because I think it sort of washes over you at the time, I think, and it's going to be the case with this Real Madrid team right now. In what, 10, 15, 20 years time, people are going to be doing shows and looking back and going, Nacho won how many Champions League?
Exactly.
What the fuck? It's going to be like quiz questions in 20 years time. So yeah, I think you do. It's only when you look back at it you think how bizarre some things are that you just take for granted at the time.
Adam, we will talk in depth about one signing that Valencia made this summer a wee bit later on in this three-part series. I know you want to look in depth at one player who came later in the season, I think. But a fair amount of business in the summer and a fair amount of chat. Was this a one-season wonder getting to that final? Could they repeat that? Could they go one better? Claudio Lopez, a huge player for them, goes to Lazio. 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐿 goes. 𝐸𝐿𝐵𝐿 goes. Who did they bring in? Big John Carew from Rosenborg. Baraja from Athletic.
Yeah.
Didier Deschamps from Chelsea in a real retirement. And 𝐿𝐵𝐿𝐵 𝐸𝐿𝐵𝐿, the star of Euro 2000 for Slovenia. Who else? Roberto Ayala, a bit of experience coming in there from Milan. So there's a lot going on. How do they fit this together to, I mean, again, spoiler alert, get to another final a few months down the line?
So, yeah, they're all, to me, eminently sensible signings, I think. The ones that come in. I remember 𝐻𝐻𝐿 going to Barcelona and always felt that he went a little bit too soon there. I think it was maybe just one of those things, Barcelona trying to gamble on the next big Spanish star, I guess, and it never really quite worked out for them. And then, yeah, I guess when you compare that to bringing in Pablo Aimar in the January, it's not really a competition. It makes it look even worse business. Baraja, like we said, I think he was class when he came in. Roberto Ayala slots in there next to Pellegrino, and that's a pretty formidable three, if you like, as a defensive unit. Really missed Claudio Lopez, and I've said that before. But he had a great season for Lazio, which we'll probably come on to as well. Scored a lot of goals in the Champions League for them. He was just a really good player. Carew, again, we spoke about nowhere near the same type of player, so you're obviously going to have to change certain things that you do. In theory, Kelly Gonzalez pinging balls in for Carew would be a good thing.
Is that a conscious thing, Adam? Do you think that that's a case of him saying we need just another dimension just in case that we've got so far and we've fallen? Would it be good to have a different type? Because to me, he was a signing even back then that I looked at. I thought he was a good player, but I didn't quite see the fit.
Yeah, it is one of those ones, isn't it? It's like when Liverpool signed Andy Carroll, and you're like,
yeah, very.
It's you don't want to become too predictable. You don't want to double down on what's worked for you, because you'll become predictable, and also you probably can't get things from the same well. But then you also don't want to go too far away that you then end up with a little bit of a mess, and you've got an option, and then you play differently, and it doesn't suit everybody else. So it's just, I think that's just so complicated to do. Everything really in terms of team building and all that sort of stuff. So I think you're right. It's probably just, let's try something else. We're never going to be able to replace like for like, but let's try something else. They also had Vicente, I think, at this time as well, who'd just come through, who I really liked. Left wing, and I think he's very young at this stage. Doesn't go off the bench in the final, which I think is something that they said was maybe a bit of an issue. They'd like to have had him on a little bit earlier. So they're good here. Whether they're starting to get figured out, I'm not sure. I think so. And obviously you've got 𝐾𝐽 and that the rumours that started pretty viciously as the season goes in terms of where he was going to go. So yeah, they were good. I probably preferred some of their players this year, but I think they were probably better as a team the year before.
Well, they do hit the ground running, just picked up where they left off. Not the hardest group. Adam, Heerenveen, Olympiacos, bloody Olympiacos again, pushing close. They take the third spot into the UEFA Cup, and it's Lyon that are second. We're at the kind of start of this period of Lyon's success in Ligue 1 and having a few moments in the Champions League. Is there any basis in that team? And Sonny Anderson's there, but he kind of straddles two eras for me, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, there's quite a bit of that actually. There's guys that you associate with Lyon when they're winning the titles, like Gregory Coupé and even Sidney Govou and Steve Marley. But then you've got Sonny Anderson, like you mentioned, Patrice 𝐿𝐿𝐭 kicking about there as well, who we had a bit of chat about when he was at Nantes and then PSG. So it's quite a strange story, this one, isn't it? I'm kind of looking forward to getting into it a little bit more in the next couple of years because they've only won 7 Ligue 1 titles and they won all of them 7 in a row, and that's the only ones they ever won at all before or after. It's a bit of a strange one. Jacques Santini is here as a manager. This is his first season as manager. He'd been their technical director for a few years before this and helped transform them with Jean-Michel Aulas, who's the owner. So he helped sort of transform them, and then Le Guen comes in 2002 and helps them along again. So I think there's a whole thing bubbling underneath that maybe isn't really that apparent at this time to people who aren't avid French football followers, of which I wasn't at this stage. So it can seem in the next couple of years that they just explode and you're like, well, where does this came from? But there's things in the background that will be really interesting, I think, to look at in more detail in future years. One kind of player that you mentioned there about maybe mid-90s, early 2000s that I think probably sums this up is Vikash Dorisu, is one I always remember. Tiny little number 10 who played for Lyon. I think he was like 5'6", and he went to Milan, I'm sure, and didn't have a very good time of it. So there's all these kind of names that feel like they're probably longer ago than they were at this point. But yeah, over the next couple of years, they obviously have huge amounts of success, which will be interesting to talk about.
Group D, okay. Again, if you want to go and fill your boots with some incredible nights and some pretty dreadful nights, Rangers-wise, then there is plenty for you to do so on the network. Davey, let's pick with the bottom team, actually, weirdly, because Adam's gone into depth a wee bit about Lyon there. Monaco, they're a storied name, they're a storied principality, of course. If you're looking at this as a purely neutral viewer, like we do so many of these groups, that would seem odd that they ended up rock bottom of any group.
This group is mental. The team who win it lose 5-0 twice in 6 matches and win the group. We're a wee bit unlucky because it's not goal difference. If it had been goal difference, we'd have gone through. But it was head-to-head, so Galatasaray just beat us. A very strange group. The Monaco team at this stage is very much in transition. Their star players are up front. Marco Simone, who we have lauded feels like a few years ago now, but he goes to Monaco late on in his career, but is really productive for them. 6 goals in this group stage, including, unfortunately, the one that ends up putting us in the UEFA Cup rather than the next group stage. Pascal Nonda, who's really exciting talent, maybe didn't quite go all the way. Back then, the joke, of course, was that a French player had failed if he didn't go to Arsenal. And Nonda was mentioned there, but didn't end up going there. But at the back, they were quite weak. They had a number of young players coming through at this stage, but I can't really see that in mitigation, Martin, because every French team in this era seemed to be bringing through
as the norm,
a superstar. So I don't think you get points for bravery. I mean, they still end up with 7 points, and to finish 4th in a group with 7 points,
that's harsh. Yeah,
that is harsh. That is fairly ridiculous, really. It is a tough group. There are 4 good sides, and I think there's a tendency with us, because there are a couple of poor performances from us. The first 70 minutes in Turkey, the performance in Graz are very poor Rangers performances, but we actually are a good side who play well in this group. The problem comes that it's a group that people cut their throat. And as I say, Sturm Graz win the group despite losing 5-0 twice, but they win their home games.
Yeah.
And that is such a key achievement for any side. You win your home games, it sets you up. They then take a point in one of the matches, and that's them through in Turkey, and that's them through. So we did get finally to see 𝐵𝐵𝐿 in a Rangers game. Unfortunately, it was him scoring what would turn it to be the winner for them. But yeah, this, as I say, it's a very strange group, the kind of thing that all football fans, we would joke and say, oh, it could only happen to us. Well, it happened to 4 teams. So it did, quite clearly it happened to a few. But I don't think there's going to be many instances of a side losing that heavily twice and winning a group, and a team on 7 points going out and completely out.
Yeah, your point about losing heavily twice is a fair one. But they're one of 3 teams in this first group phase who lose heavily in the first game and go through. It's a kind of topsy-turvy Champions League, I guess. Adam, Galatasaray are UEFA Cup holders. Super Mario's there, very much filling his boots in Turkey as he did in Portugal. The magician, 𝐬𝐻𝐫𝐞𝐿, is this his final season in football? And there's just a nice blend going on there. We'll talk about how they do later on, but they progressed to the knockouts, and they're clearly got something going on there. And is it just that mercurial blend? Is there something a wee bit more systematic going on?
No, I think it's maybe a bit of both. I'm not going to lie and say that 𝐵𝐵𝐿 doesn't have a huge part in this. I know we said a couple of years ago he's maybe starting to slow down, and you go to Turkey because you are starting to slow down. I think that was still always the case there. But 34 goals in 43 games this season is still pretty impressive, regardless of where you are. Hadji chipped in with 13 this final season. The thing I like about this is it's just a good ending, I think, for a great player. I think if you were to be a player like that from a smaller country who gets to the peak of the game as he did, I know he's not went back home, but he's back to Galatasaray, playing out his years in a league that he feels comfortable in. He's going to be the man, and he goes back 31, 32, wins 4 titles, scored loads of goals, nearly 100 goals for them in 4 or 5 seasons. And like you said, that UEFA Cup win there, it's just a really good way to go out. He never had the best of times at Barcelona, really, but to then go and get that little Indian summer, if you like, for him, I think is something that not a lot of players really are able to do. So I think that was quite good for him. They do have a few kind of players coming through that will obviously be bigger names in the future. 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐫𝐢, who was at Newcastle as well, is coming through here. He does quite well for them this year as well. So it's a nice little mix for Galatasaray. And obviously we'll talk about how they do, but I think just a little nod to 𝐼, who's been involved, or we've spoken about him pretty much every other show, I think, that we've done so far. So for this to be the end for him, I think was quite nice.
Davey, fans of narrative on this podcast, especially writers, and go back to 1988 and 𝐼 Bucharest coming to Ibrox, and this very young, precocious talent was talked about in advance, and we see him at both ends of his career, and there is something special about it, because he was a special footballer of the 1990s.
He really was, and a player who had a cultural resonance that just special players get, just a cultural resonance out with his own country or his own region. He was somebody that you looked forward to seeing. He was very glamorous, but he also had that kind of temperament at times. We could see him, he was a player a bit like 𝐼𝐮𝐞𝐭, actually. There was clearly a little angel and a little devil on either shoulder, and you never knew what you were going to get. And those guys are often the most interesting. But the reason for it was fairly simple. He was a sublime footballer who was capable of doing outrageous things. And you're absolutely correct in saying that we did get to see him at both ends of his career, and of course you look at the clubs he played for in between. Unfortunately got the better of us twice, really, Martin, in those 2 experiences, but he's still a player whose name carries, if you watch the Euros and they talk about Romania, they talk about him, because he is, in a way that every country I think has 1 or 2 really special players who are used as shorthand for that country's football. János Hagi can't get mentioned without his dad being mentioned, and that's why. They did have some good players, and an interesting game within this actually was the 0-0 at Ibrox, where Advocat completely ripped up his system, went 4-3-3. It was the first we'd really seen 𝐬𝐿𝐵𝐼𝐻𝐿𝐵𝐼𝐻 of what I'd felt like cold storage to play on the left wing. And yeah, it's just, this group has so many plot points. Although we're about to go to Group D, where if you had given me £1,000 to bet on who would come bottom of that group, I would have lost you £1,000.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about the dominance of his name in Romanian football, and I should have shared this on this pod before, but I did meet both Hagis in Sainsbury's Braehead one Sunday morning before Christmas, I think. And very, very rarely do I meet a Rangers player, and I'm far more excited to meet their dad than them, but that's definitely the case there. Yes, the next group, Group E. Okay, Adam, again, we'll start at the bottom and explain that. This has Deportivo La Coruña, Panathinaikos, the Greeks again. Hamburg, I think, making their Champions League debut, and maybe wrong there.
Yeah,
and
must be
Juve. Juve, who draw and win and draw their first 4 games, and then lose their last 2 3-1 at home to Hamburg and then in Greece. What is going on?
Yeah, it's another kind of cutthroaty group, I would say. I guess if you nod to Panathinaikos here, we're really starting to see some of the Euro 2004 guys coming to the fore now. You get 𝐵𝐸𝐻 at right back, who I thought was great. Bassinas as well, who scores a couple of goals in here. Yeah, you're really starting to see that coming through, which again is going to be quite interesting, because it's never really something I've thought about. That sort of legacy, if there is one, or that foreboding of Greece, did it just come out of nowhere? I'm not sure. We'll be able to track that through these shows, which I think is going to be quite interesting, and we'll then be able to see where they've all ended up as well. So that will be quite an interesting one to track. In terms of Deportivo, I think they were great. Probably quite similar to Valencia, maybe a little bit unfortunate that it's kind of happened at the same time, really, that both of them have had a good couple of years around about this time. I don't think it's any coincidence, I've said this before, that it is to do with it being a pretty poor season in La Liga. I think certainly the year before, Deportivo won that league with 69 points, which tells its own story when you consider that the season after this season that we're talking about, Madrid win it and it's 80 points. So it's a pretty big gap there, but you can't take anything away from them. Obviously, they have a really, really nice period here. 𝐸𝐿𝐴, the manager, just gets them playing some really nice football. There's a couple of names that I think are interesting at this time. Emerson was here post Middlesbrough, pre Rangers. Maybe there's a case that he should have stayed there, to be honest, as far as we're concerned. 𝐶𝐵𝐵, not one that I didn't remember playing here. He's only his only season in European football, which is an interesting one. Everything else was Japan, Brazil, someone else in Asia, I think. So that's an interesting one. Just randomly pitched up for a season, played Champions League football at Deportivo, and then went on his merry way. Juan Capdevila as well, or Joan Capdevila, youngish at this point before he went to Villarreal, which I think he's probably more known for. Really interesting team, I think. Pragmatic, really, really efficient. But again, probably because of the size of the team that they were in terms of who they're playing with, they do have a squad full of experience, but they're also quick on the break, breaking teams down. Noureddine Nebet was one I always remember, as Moroccan centre half, who was an absolute unit.
Monster.
Mauro Silva as well, who I think is just a really, really good, one of those really good holding midfield players of the time that there seem to be 10 a penny of. But I think, as always with these teams, we spoke about it with maybe Dynamo Kiev and a couple other ones, their strength had been their attacks. Roy Mackay, Diego Tristan, Pauleta the year before, he goes to Bordeaux this summer, but they bring in Walter Pandiani, who obviously wasn't at the same level, but still pretty good. And then what all good teams had at this time was 𝐵𝐿 giving them a bit of unpredictability, whether that's fighting with the manager or he headbutted them during a training session and got a ban. I think, actually, I might be wrong. People, David, you might know, or people might be able to listen, but I'm sure you loaded up Football Manager or Champ Manager one year, and 𝐵𝐿 had, was it a doping ban he had? There was like a...
Yeah, he was 13 months.
I remember, because I always...
into my memory.
Round about this time, I'm like, I really want to sign him. And it's like, yeah, you can sign him, but you can't play him for like a year. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
So, he was more infamous, I think, than famous at this point. But yeah, just a nice team that appeared at a time, lucky if you like, but appeared at a time where there wasn't really a dominant team in La Liga.
I don't think that's coincidence that they emerged during this period of weakness. But you're right, they had some quality players, and a player I absolutely adored scoring goals here for Hamburg, Tony Yeboah. Yeah,
they've got a couple of interesting players as well. 𝐵𝐿𝐴 kicking about as well, I'm sure, at the time for Hamburg. It's a good point.
One thing about this group that I find really fascinating is that 3 of the clubs have since been relegated out of their divisions now for different reasons. But obviously Hamburg and Deportivo are now, nowhere near the clubs that they were. Juve had their �𝐾𝐭 incidents as well. But it doesn't seem that long ago. And then you think the idea of Deportivo La Coruña or Hamburg in European competition at this level now, it seems from another planet.
It's a good point you made, and I just want to pick up on it before we move on, Adam, about Panathinaikos, and you can start seeing that Euro 2004 thing. It was a shock. I'm not going to be revisionist enough to say, actually, looking back on it, they were always going to win that. But the way people talk about it it's, Hamilton Accies winning the Scottish Cup or something like that. This is doing this show. There are foundations there of experience and playing at elite level and coping and just being able to deal with these kind of players that you'll face in that compressed summer of 7 games or whatever it is, 6 games, I think, the size of the Euros then. Maybe in retrospect shouldn't be the absolute shock that we talk about, and maybe a wee bit more respect just put on the years before.
Well, yeah, and one of the reasons I would say that this is the case is that Greek players tend to either move very young or don't. So a lot of the Greek side played in Greece, and they had certain star players who played out with it. But it's not really a country where the export, like Portugal or Holland, where the good young, the older players are scouted constantly. It seems to be that they get scouted very young and move out, and those are the ones that we know, or they stay in Greece at one of 2 clubs for the vast majority of their career. So I think that was a part of it, that they didn't have household names or even that thing where there's 3 or 4, elite guys playing at huge clubs. But you're absolutely right. Their consistency, and it isn't over, well, consistency I suppose can't be over 1 year, but we're talking now, what, 5-6 year period before they win the European Championships. That's quite deep. That's a lot of experience a lot of the players gained at the highest level of football.
Yeah. Group F has a fair bit of experience at the very top. Adam, Bayern Munich, we will talk about later on, but they are very, very quickly showing a fair bit of power. Paris Saint-Germain are back in the mix. They go up with them. Nicholas Anelka back in the City of Love. What else is going on with that team? Because again, very much there's hope for the future, but there's some kind of old faces there as well that we've maybe seen and or talked about in previous shows.
Yeah, they don't have a great season this year. In the league, certainly. I think did they even make the top 10? I can't remember. Off the top of my head. I think this is the PSG that I remember sort of growing up. There's not a huge amount really kicking about. Laurent Robert is their top goal scorer this year, which I think probably tells you everything you need to know about the type of team that they were at this stage. This is obviously way before the billions. I was going to say millions, but billions coming in from Qatar. And yeah, Anelka, I think very quickly for me becomes their main man. He didn't have the best of time at Madrid, as we know, and he sort of starts to then bounce about a little bit. Yeah, they're okay at this stage. They're how would you? I'm trying to think how you describe it. They're I guess there's not comparisons with Man City, but you know what I mean. Like before the billions and billions of dollars came in at Man City, they were obviously nowhere near. I don't necessarily think PSG were at that level, but they certainly struggled, I think, a fair bit. Sacking managers all the time, not really getting much of a muchness at all. And yeah, some of their star players, Frederic 𝐬𝐻𝐻, for example, was their captain at this time, and it's not really you can't imagine that now. For example, PSG being their captain being Frederic 𝐬𝐻𝐻. It's not really something that you would think. It's just a bit of a strange one. So it's really hard, I think, to apply context to it. But yeah, they're sort of stumbling about in the darkness a little bit at this point, I would say.
And Rosenborg and Helsingborg making up that group, and Rosenborg again just doing things and getting through to the UEFA Cup. Yep. That's what they did. David, Anderlecht were one of the other teams that were walloped in match day 1, this time by Manchester United, and they ended up winning the group. Manchester United went as well. PSV Eindhoven ended up third in the UEFA Cup, and our old friends Dynamo Kiev starting to look a little out of the picture now at this particular level. How did the Anderlecht thing come to pass? We'll speak about United maybe next week, but this is, you mentioned Juventus being fourth is very bizarre, but this seems to be equally as bizarre, to be honest.
They'd kind of served notice by knocking out Porto in the qualifying round, which was a shock. They had Thomas 𝐟𝐻𝐿𝐵𝐻𝐿𝐵 up front. Remember him, mostly known to us in the UK now for his spell at Everton, but he was absolutely on fire in this group stage. And just aside, they get walloped early on, and you think, right, thanks for coming, lads. Take your beatings and take your cash and bugger off. But they regroup and they begin to pick up a couple of results, and they had a very, very straightforward way of playing. It was your old-fashioned 4-4-2, a target man and somebody quick in 𝐟𝐻𝐿𝐵𝐻𝐿𝐵, and that was incidentally what Everton signed him to do. Remember his partnership with Cahill, who was great in the air, and that was literally how Everton played him. But it worked. They were very diligent defensively. Great atmosphere at their old stadium there as well. One of the kind of bear pit style stadiums. It was a wee bit, actually. Watch the footage for this. It's a bit of a shambles of a place, but it cocked up a terrific atmosphere. And they just sort of quietly come through in the rails. United sort of feel, I'm sure, that they're never in any real danger in this group. But yeah, they did. But Anderlecht, as I say, it shouldn't have been a complete shock because they had knocked out a good Porto side in coming through. But sometimes that freshness, you mentioned earlier about Dynamo Kiev, they don't have that anymore. You can have a lot of things, but you can't have newness twice. And they've lost the star players. Teams are aware of what they do and how they play now. And Anderlecht, sort of, I don't want to say beginner's luck because that's not fair, but just this sense of nothing to lose, and especially after that first match. And the way they played was fairly basic. There wasn't any great tactical innovation that would act as a shock to somebody, but they were enthusiastic, they were hard-working, they were diligent, and they did enough to come through in a group where I do think that the favourites maybe pulled up a wee bit early to conserve energy for later races.
Big 𝐿𝐵𝐻𝐿𝐵𝐻 up front, Adam. Does that maybe explain the rudimentary approach from Anderlecht?
That's exactly what I was going to say, and I was going to say big 𝐿𝐵𝐻𝐿𝐵𝐻 as well, which I think you legally have to when he's 6'8". Yeah. I think so. Same as David said, he scored a lot. He scored a lot of goals. I think at this time when he was back in, I was going to say back in Belgium, but Anderlecht is Belgium. The year before, where he played for Lokeren, he scored loads of goals there. He went on. I mean, a bit of a strange one, I think, at Dortmund. The way that you sort of, again, we spoke earlier on about Carew, I think, David, and how it maybe didn't really fit in my head. I can't imagine someone like Dortmund having such a big target man in the way that 𝐿𝐵𝐻𝐿𝐵𝐻 did, but scored a decent amount of goals there as well. So yeah, I think that probably does sum it up. They had Bart Gur as well, who was a name I always struggled to pronounce round about my parents, which was always a funny one, but he's one that sticks in my mind for that reason as well.
Can you imagine David Moyes' reaction when he first watched Jan Koller nodding the ball on to Thomas 𝐟𝐻𝐿𝐵𝐻 when he went to scout them? He must have been in hog heaven at that point, just all his dreams coming true. And Anderlecht probably told him, you can only get one of them. And he was like, that's ridiculous.
He just spotted walking out the ground, just muttering to himself, this is football. This is football.
Yeah.
Mikel Antonio had glint in his eye at that point. The final group has Milan, Barcelona, Besiktas and Leeds. We'll speak next week about Leeds United because they are one of the major stories of this particular season. Adam, Milan eventually go through as group winners. Some famous names there. Sheva's there, Bierhoff's there. But Barca do not, and they've got some big names as well, but it's again not quite clicking. You mentioned earlier that there's a bit of an interregnum in Spain with the big two not being as utterly dominant, and that creates opportunities for Depor and maybe Atletico Madrid or whatever. What happened with Barcelona here?
Just before that, I guess I remember the absolute excitement. Not a huge Madrid fan, as I think everybody will probably know by now. The absolute excitement when Redondo moves to AC Milan this summer. I'm thinking, oh, fantastic. And then it's just an absolute nightmare. I think literally his first training session suffers that knee injury. And he's out for like 2 or 3 years. He barely makes 20 appearances for them. So I was gutted. Gutted at that. Barcelona, we're now in peak Rivaldo territory, aren't we? It's he is the one-man band, if you like. This is the season where Van Gaal he's back at Holland, isn't he? By this point, he's with the national team now.
Failing to qualify for the 2002 World Cup.
That's right. So they're kind of going through. Barcelona are going through, I guess, a little bit of a change there. We mentioned most of their signings already, to be honest. Marc Overmars, Manuel Petit, 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐻 coming from Valencia. Pepe Reina, I think, gets promoted this summer as well. And there's a wee bit of a change. Some of those Dutch players, no surprise, start to leave. Figo obviously goes to Madrid and kicks off the 𝐵𝐵𝐿𝐴𝐶𝐵 era this summer. Ron de Boer comes to us. And Bogarde goes to Chelsea, which was a massive success, as we all know. And they loan out a young Spaniard to PSG, who we've discussed. Obviously, Mikel Arteta goes this summer to them as well. So they, like I said, they are very much Ronaldo. 36 goals in all competitions this year for Rivaldo. I guess it kind of speaks for itself. They do. I always find Barcelona in these competitions at this time entertaining to watch, even though if they're not quite at their peak, if that makes sense. I always think there's just so many goals when they're involved, and I think that was the same for here. There's some really, really good games. You go back and watch the highlights, and some absolutely fantastic goals from them. And I think the fact that they're always liable to throw one in at the other end in this era makes them quite interesting.
Well, Dida does help, as we'll discuss next week. The 3-3 in the San Siro, David, was, I mean, Barcelona contractually obliged to be involved in 3-3 draws and Champions League group phases. I'm not entirely sure, but a Rivaldo hat-trick illustrates Adam's point, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, he had now come to the fore, Figo obviously having left, and he'd been their main player anyway, I think it's fair to say, but now he was the undisputed main player. As Adam mentioned, though, their defence is howling this season, it really is, and sides can get at them, but they could score goals, and that game is a wonderful example of that, with Milan just staying in at times when Rivaldo's on this one-man destructive show. And there's that fabulous early victory over Leeds as well, where they just slap them a bit, basically. But even later on in the group, they go to Elland Road, it's passionate, it's wild, Leeds get the goal. Who burst the bubble in the last minute? Him again. So they weren't a one-man team, but they would have been a mid-table 11-man team if it had been somebody else in rather than him.
Adam, this, of course, 2000-2001 is the glorious Scudetto win for Roma and Totti and Batistuta and Vinny Montella and all the rest of the boys. Milan 5th, 6th, somewhere like that. Because they are going to win soon. But where is this great giant at this moment in time? Because they win this group, they turn up. I guess is it just individuals popping up with moments that we've talked about so often on various shows and getting found out in the course of a 36, 38 game season or whatever?
Yeah, I think they're sort of caught between two ideas here. I think there's no doubt they've sort of lost that edge that they had. I think they've lost that. It's a strange one because, like, you look through the team and the kind of core of the team: Maldini, Albertini, Costa Curta. They're all there. Gattuso's obviously back now and dominating the midfield. And like I mentioned, Redondo coming in would really have knitted all of this together. When you think about it, if it was certainly the player that we spoke about in the last couple of years. But yeah, outside of that, they've got punts on Ibrahim Ba. Roque Jr. comes in, fair enough, who will be quite decent. 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐫𝐢 comes in. Francesco Coco was another player that I thought was decent as a kind of left wing back, but not really anyone who's going to pull up trees. Yeah, it's just a bit of a mess, I guess.
Well,
exactly.
see, to add to your point, Adam, I remember at this time there was a real, you know how powerful the Italian ultras and support can be within a club. And their demands were that they wanted to, I always remember this, that they issued, one of those open demands that ultra groups in Italy do to the chairman, saying that they wanted to retain the Milan defensive solidity for which they'd been famous, but that they were watching other clubs playing this amazing, intricate attacking football, and they wanted to do that too. So, the Milan go off to try and please their fans, right? So we've got to be ultra defensive, solid, never give away any goals, but also we've got to be free flowing, play wonderful attacking football. It just a club that maybe had grown a wee bit fat in the success previously, and the expectation levels and the demands had gone up to such a thing. So that there is an identity issue here, because the Milan fans expect them to be everything, really, and it simply isn't possible to do that. So I think Adam's spot on when he mentions there is an identity issue at the heart of this Milan era, never mind team, but they will sort of get over it and come again in the mid part of the 2000s. But at this point they were sort of just searching in the dark a little bit for something.
And a funny little footnote, I guess. I think we probably mentioned it when we spoke about the great Milan teams. But Sebastiano Rossi is still kicking about here. I think at the time that at the time we discussed him, I think I said it's weird because you think 10 years later on and he's still there. He plays 17 games for them this season. It genuinely feels like 10 years ago since we discussed him on those shows. Never mind 10 years in terms of his actual career. But there he is kicking about. I think he's got another year after this one before he finally gives up the ghost at almost 40. But yeah, it's one of those things. They're caught between their team of their great team of the late 80s, early 90s even, and they've still got a few of them there, but they've not quite managed to get their act together again.
Gentlemen, that'll do us as we start 2000-2001. Thank you, David.
Pleasure as always. Thank you, guys.
Cheers, 𝐸𝐿𝐵𝐷𝐼.
Thank you.
Next week, one United going up, one United going down, and Bayern start their campaign of revenge. Until then, bye for now. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, search for 𝐼𝐿𝐵𝐷𝐼 Podcast. We've got new deep dives, drafts, and breakdowns dropping every other day.